Okay, so now we're going to talk about the McGovern-Fraser reforms. These were the reforms that the Democratic Party came up with after the whole debacle in 1968. And what the Democratic Party first adopted them, but because the Democrats back then controlled most of the state legislatures, eventually all the states adopted them, and now everybody basically follows this same format. So let me talk to you about the main change that happened as a result of the McGovern-Fraser reforms. First, what the McGovern-Fraser reforms said, indicated, was that the party leaders were no longer going to be the ones who were in charge of selecting the nominees. That the citizens or party members were going to be able to participate in that. And the way it was going to work is that every state had to either have what's called a primary or a caucus. A primary is just like an election. In California, we have primaries, where what happens is essentially, if you're a Democrat, you walk in during a Democratic primary, they give you a ballot, and and there may be multiple people who are running for president, for senator, for House of Reps, state senator, state assemblyman. You walk in and you pick out which Democrat do you want to vote for, and then you vote. And you give them your ballot and you walk away. It's just like voting in a general election. Caucuses are a little bit different. They're a more involved ordeal, and we don't have them here in California, and I'm just going to describe them very briefly so you have an idea what they are. In a caucuses, whereas voting in a primary takes just about, 10 minutes if there's no line, a caucus is it takes a couple hours. What happens is everybody in a particular district goes and they meet at one place. It might be at a community center, it might be at a high school, but everybody will meet in one place. So the Democrats are going to meet in one place, Republicans are going to meet somewhere else. And everybody walks in and they start talking with other people about who they're supporting. And at some point in the meeting, whoever's running the caucus will say, okay, everybody who's supporting Mitt Romney, well, let's do Republicans because we're having a Republican primary. Everybody who's supporting Mitt Romney, you go over to that corner. Everybody who's supporting Rick Santorum, you go over there. Everybody who's supporting Newt Gingrich, you go over there. And hey, that guy who's supporting Ron Paul, you go over there. Then what they do is each group goes ahead and they elect somebody to be their spokesman. And so the spokesman for Romney will speak for a minute and say, this is why you should support Mitt Romney. Then the Gingrich camp will do the same thing. The Romney camp will do the same thing. The Santorum camp will do the same thing. And then they'll go ahead and let people mingle again, see if anybody's minds are changed. Usually they're not, but see if anybody's minds are changed. And then they'll go ahead and they'll count how many people supported each candidate. And then they'll send that in to the state where they're collecting all the votes. So it's a much more involved thing. But the basic idea is still the same. People who care enough to get out and participate will be the ones, they'll be the ones to go ahead and select the nominee. When you win in a primary, you are awarded delegates based on how you do your performance in the primaries or the caucuses. Some states have what's called a winner-take-all system, where if you get more votes than somebody else in the primary, you get all of their delegates. And each of the parties decide how many delegates a state gets. So for example, in the Republican Party, Texas, which has a whole bunch of Republicans, is going to have a lot of delegates. California, even though it's got a larger population, doesn't have as many Republicans, and so they may get fewer delegates. Each party decides. Now, so if you win a primary, then you win delegates. It's either winner take all or something called proportional representation. In proportional representation, what happens is if you win 30% of the votes, then you get 30% of that state's delegates. If you get 20% of the vote, you get 20% of that state's delegates. And so they're just different ways that delegates are handed out. The delegates themselves, so let's say I'm Mitt Romney and I've won 30 delegates in whatever state I happen to be in. The people that I'm going to select to be delegates are going to be people who I know are really loyal to my campaign. Maybe there are people who work for me, maybe there are people who donated money for me, maybe there are party officials that I know are strong supporters. I'm going to pick those people to be my delegates, because I want to make sure that when they go to the convention, they're going to vote for me and they're going to stick by me. After all the primaries are done, everybody gets together at the convention, and the delegates all get together and they vote and they decide who the nominee is going to be. The delegates go ahead, hold on a second, I'm sorry. They vote to determine who the party nominee is going to be. Each delegate gets one vote, right? And the way it works is, especially at presidential conventions, when we're nominating the president, the delegates are required to vote for their candidate on the first ballot, not necessarily on every other ballot, because there have been elections where what happens is you have 3 or 4 or 5 different candidates, and all of them have won a certain number of delegates, but nobody's got a majority, and you need a majority to win. So everybody votes on the first, they do the first ballot where everybody votes, and not everybody gets nobody gets a majority. So what they have to do is they have to stop, and take another vote. But in between, people start making deals with one another. Hey, look, you support this guy and we'll do this. You support this guy and we'll do that. And so there can be a lot of discussion that goes on. Usually nowadays, before we go to the convention, we know, before anybody goes to a convention, we already know who the nominee is going to be. And then the way it works, there's a link to a video on the lecture notes, but I'm just going to go ahead and play a clip from the last convention. It was the Democratic convention, where this is the process by which they went ahead and counted the votes. And so this is Nancy Pelosi speaking, and you'll hear how they go ahead and do it.
Please welcome Democratic National Convention Secretary Alice Travis Germond. I will now ask our Convention Secretary to call the roll of the states. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, and thank you. Now, according to the rules passed by this convention, following the nominating speeches for president, we proceed immediately to the roll call. The roll call shall continue until we have a nominee whom I believe will be our next president. It is now my honor to begin with the great state of Alabama.
So now she's going to...
Alabama, you have 60 votes.
So what happened here is that now the first state that she's going to call on at the convention is going to be Alabama. And Alabama is going to, in this case, it's the Democratic primary. They're going to tell them how many votes Clinton won and how many votes Barack Obama won. So listen to and this is what happens at each convention. So here you go again.
How do you cast them?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The great state of Alabama, one of the most diverse delegations in this hall. A state that is ready to cast the first votes of this convention for the next President of the United States. 48. Say 48, I'll do that.
The great state of Alabama casts 48 votes for Barack Obama.
48.
Madam Secretary, the great state of Alabama casts 5 votes for Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Thank you, Alabama. Alabama cast 48 votes for Senator Obama and 5 votes for Senator Clinton. The next state is Alaska. You have 18 votes.
And that's what they do. They go through all the states, Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas. They go all the way through. Every one of them gives some stupid speech about how, something great about their state. And then they say the number of votes that each candidate won, and they move on. And that's what that's what a convention is. It happens the same time every time. It's usually pretty boring. But again, the bottom line is that what happens is that to win the nomination, whichever candidate needs a majority of delegates to win. Although, like in the case of 2008, everybody knew who had the majority of delegates. As a matter of fact, what happened at that convention was when it got to the point where Barack Obama was about to go over the top in terms of votes, or when enough people were about to cast votes that there would be enough people who have voted to elect Barack Obama, even though some of them had actually voted for Hillary Clinton. What happened is, I think it was Illinois was getting ready to vote, Barack Obama's home state, and they decided to pass, and they were going to let New York go ahead and vote instead. And when New York got ready to vote, some guy spoke for like 5 minutes commending everybody who ever lived in New York, and then handed the microphone to Hillary Clinton. And then Hillary Clinton at that point moved that to suspend the normal rules and have everybody agree called by acclamation. Everybody was going to agree that Barack Obama unanimously was the nominee of the Democratic Party, and Hillary Clinton was his only competition. And so, of course, everybody agreed to great fanfare, and they voted, and Barack Obama became the unanimous nominee of the Democratic Convention, even though there were a lot of people who actually were there as delegates for Hillary Clinton. So that's the way it works. Okay, it's kind of a show, when at least when we know who's going to win already. There's no suspense as to what's going to happen. But here's the key. The goal of these reforms, the goal of the McGovern-Fraser reform, was to ensure that ordinary voters have more of a say and have more power in the selection process. That was the goal, to deal with the problem of what happened in 1968. They created this system where individual members of the party, sometimes independents, we'll talk about that in a second, go ahead and they decide who they want the nominee to be. They all get together at a convention, the delegates who go to this convention, and then they select the nominee. The people are going to be involved. So that it's not just the party leaders, the people are involved. And the idea would be that way the people who get nominated are going to be closer to the preferences of the population as a whole, except for one thing. That is not how it worked out. And we'll talk about that in a second.